Hello again. So we're now on the 6th of December, Wednesday, 2023. I do have to apologise as a somewhat remnantly vain female. With nature's handiwork never granting me, never conferring that much beauty in the first place. Hello, Maya, Marsh, and others who I know who are absolutely stunning humans. And it wasn't to be for me, but I'm apologising up front for this sort of, as I said the other day, Helena Bonham Carter without the looks or the finances or the career on steroids kind of hairdo that goes on here. I really don't care about how I look anymore. I really don't. There's only so much you can do when you get to nearly 53 and you have like sort of pouchy anuses above your eye sacs suddenly when only 6 years ago you were being told you look like you're in your 30s. Yeah, what can you do? Moving along, I'm going to talk about some things that are very pertinent because, as I told you last week, and I have been, in the last previous broadcast, I've been trying to go to Canberra to door knock on ministers to say, well, I've been saying since 2017, and here it is in the very last week of Parliament, sitting Parliament in the Australian Federal Parliament this week. We have the very last sitting week where the High Court made a ruling a few weeks ago saying that in people who are in indefinite detention in Australia had to be released, whether they were stateless or not. And some of these people have literally been convicted and served their time for raping, murdering and being pedophiles. And I have been saying since 2017, as I explained in the last video broadcast to anyone who'd listen, and Kay Harrison, the documentary filmmaker who was my neighbour at the time up at Fegans Bay, that if you can put ankle bracelets on some people with GPS monitoring, why can't you put them on women, on men who offend, who threaten women and their children with domestic violence, be it abuse and or murder? And then I wrote an email this week to Katie Gallagher, the Minister for Women, and to my local Labor, she happens to be rep in the seat of Cunningham, Alison Burns, who I explained blew me off on a false pretense as if I was trying to get her to interfere with my family law court case, when in fact I was trying to get to an interview opportunity to explain the structural reforms that need to be made to that act, particularly the criminalisation of parental alienation, where one parent steals a child from another loving, devoted parent against family law court orders. And there is no consequence whatsoever when you will go to jail or get a or get a criminal fine, or get an extreme financial fine, or get a community service order for driving your car having failed to pay a parking fine after 4 months, when they cancel your licence, despite the fact that your skill set to drive has not changed whatsoever. And this is absolutely a moral hazard, and it's ludicrous, and it's totally incongruent, and it's absolutely pathetic, because what you're saying is that revenue raising and roads in this country of Australia are worth more than children to their parents. That's what you're saying in law by your action and inaction of it. And so a couple of things. When you phone several times in any minister's office and you don't stop, which is otherwise known as campaigning, if you're a Greenpeace campaigner or if you're anybody else campaigning for any kind of reform anywhere. For example, if I was a big pharma campaigner over in the US in Washington, being paid handsomely on a six-figure income to go and knock consistently on the doors of legislation makers, I would be a campaigner. Whereas if I am a single disability support pension receiver, abused female who suffered murders and abuse by 2 out of 3 of the fathers of her children, been nonetheless a purchaser of 3 homes, earned a university degree, etc., I'm apparently a complainant, an unreasonable complainant, according to Kate Washington's office at DCJ in New South Wales, and apparently according to Rochelle White, who was which is very disappointing, because she is the minister, one of the policy advisors for the minister federally for Australia for Women, Katie Gallagher, who's also the finance minister. And so I'm going to read you today, which is now we're approaching 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm going to read you an open letter I'm going to publish it as an open letter, but I'm going to read you a letter that that I sent to several female ministers, particularly the Teals. So this goes out to Zali Steggall especially, a couple of years younger than me. She's an Order of Australia Olympian who has the seat that I grew up in, up on the northern beaches of Sydney in New South Wales, and rightfully so. And what a great esteemed human being she is. And it goes out to Allegra Spender and Dr. Monique Ryan and Kylie. Sorry, I've forgotten your surname. I'll find it in a minute when I call up my email that I'm about to read to you. How remiss. Here we go. So I sent the following email. I'm going to do a straight read to various ministers, including the alternative government, that's the so-called Liberal National Party of Australia's government, as government's federal Attorney General, so the Shadow Attorney General, Michaelia Cash. I even sent it to her yesterday, as well as Jackie Lambie and Senator Hanson-Young, and Dr. Monique Ryan and Tanya Plibersek, Alison Burns, Brian Mitchell down in Tasmania. Huge shout out to Benjamin Dudman and Tanya Plibersek's. Benjamin Dudman is the policy advisor for Brian Mitchell in Tasmania. And he's a great, hard-working guy, and so is Tony and Kerry and all the women up in Tanya Plibersek's Sydney office. I haven't had the same experience so far down in Wollongong with Alison Burns' office, but this is also a direct address to Jodie Harrison, the Minister for Women of New South Wales, a direct address to Kate Washington, the Minister for DCJ, which is the Department of Communities and Justice, and to Rochelle White, who is one of the policy advisors for Katie Gallagher, who is our federal... I don't know who's watching, but it's come on there that hello, whoever you are. And one of the one of the policy advisors for the Federal Minister for Women, Katie Gallagher, who's also the Finance Minister. And to the Federal Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, who, of course, is the ultimate presider of the Federal and Family Circuit Court, Federal Circuit Court and Family Law Court, the FC, Federal Circuit and Family Court, FCA, that's their domain name. So here we go. This is a direct read. I don't know who you are. You're not appearing here on, so I can only presume that I don't know you, which is fine. That's great. I hope you're somebody who has got clout, as Barker accused me of trying to get from her when I was actually trying to collate and centralise recently the Australian musicians for the Yes Vote 2023. She accused me of trying to steal her clout. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Here we go. So dear all of those people I just mentioned to you, we're sitting at 3 p.m. at this point on Wednesday the 6th of December. So here's the open letter to ministers in Australia who wish to make a difference to the murder of women in Australia and to women's parity with men in general, which, by the way, just park it for a minute, if you go onto the UNESCO website and type in rights of women and children, you will find that any nation like Australia who is voluntarily a signatory to the UNESCO Human Rights Charter is obliged to go back home and enact domestic legislation which upholds their voluntary international obligations. So we are arguably not doing this at all because we have absolutely refused to provide Australian women with universally free childcare. And of course, if you are going to refuse, as UNESCO obliges us to, hello, whoever Melita Dahl is, hi, if you are going to refuse to give Australian women in a so-called advanced democracy universally free childcare, even and especially when they are fleeing men who are abusive and or violent to them and their children, And yesterday in the broadcast, or I think it was a couple of days ago, sorry, in the last broadcast here, which is migrated over to YouTube at DDTV Australia, that's DEEDEE TV Australia, if you want to have a look, for keeping it there for posterity. I'm going to set up a Patreon page soon so that I can try and get my own journalism company up going about this, because it was offensive today to be told that I was essentially blacklisted because I'd phoned them a few times and said, well, what are you going to do about this? You've got the final week of federal Australian Parliament where you are refusing to talk about the issue of putting the fact that you are going to put GPS, triangulated up to a satellite. So global positioning system, GPS triangulated ankle bracelet monitors on high-risk offenders who have been released due to the High Court, not Labor's, the High Court's decision a couple of weeks ago that it's illegal to indefinitely detain people who serve their time. And so one very adroit journalist in the National Press Club today, hands up question session to the Federal Attorney General Mark Dreyfus and to the Minister for Home Affairs Claire O'Neill, asked the question, and he put it very well, and I don't know which outlet he's from. I've been trying to get onto the Press Club site, but they haven't uploaded it yet. And he asked the very significant question, well, let us get this straight. You're essentially creating a class of largely men, but perpetrators, we'll just call them perpetrators, but they're overwhelmingly men, surprise, surprise, who are rapists, murderers and pedophiles, who have been released into the Australian community, and you're clamouring and, scouring the place to procure GPS ankle bracelets so that police and other forces of law can monitor where these people are in the Australian community so that they can do no further harm. But yet you cannot stop, as you pretend and bullshit to Australian women, particularly Australian women, but the entire Australian populace. But you lie to Australian women that you cannot do the same thing for men who are threatening to kill them and their children, and or who are abusing extensively them and their children. And in the previous broadcast, again, because I don't know who's watching all of these and who's just watching one of them, so I try to cover off as many issues as I can in each of them, just to touch on them so that you can go back down the list and watch them. I'm sorry about the goddamn blower out the window. It's just always so noisy here. But, it's not a great sound environment. So if we can do this for aliens, people from overseas who've been released by the High Court into the Australian community, and who three of whom have already reoffended. One just smoked some pot and got caught with marijuana. The second one apparently committed two. That's great, Melita, thank you. Committed two offences where he violated people, and he's been a pedophile or a rapist. I'm sorry, I've forgotten which one. So over immigration detention and the release by the High Court, by edict of the High Court, of these high risk reoffenders who have also already paid their dues by serving time. A male journalist, not that it should matter, but a male journalist from the outlet from whom I don't know, as I said, I'm trying to find out, put his hand up and said to the Federal Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, so what you're essentially telling us, and this is a fact, because what he said is also true. So it's a fact that he did it, and it's a fact that what he said is completely illogical outcome of the government, who I vote for, by the way, or who I used to vote for, the government's policy of putting ankle bracelets on people who've been ordered out into the community by the High Court this week. And he put his hand up and said, so what you're trying to tell us is that we can somehow find and purchase, get. Sorry if you think I'm condescending, but I'm hoping that this is going to a very broad audience, okay, and hopefully overseas. And that's what it's called in Australian government on local, state and federal levels, where any time any level of government goes and buys a goods or service, they're procuring it. So the Federal Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, was asked by a male who I don't know the name of in the Press Club today, Wednesday the 6th of December 2023, are you essentially telling us now that you can procure GPS-monitored ankle bracelets for high-risk offenders who are aliens to Australia, who have been released into our community, but you can't do it for every other class of high-risk offending Australians? Now, this is exactly what I've been saying since 2017, and lots of women have been saying, and in fact, kicking it along even further. On the drum 2 weeks ago, and my proof that I was saying it since 2017, as I said in previous broadcasts, is that I said it to my neighbour, the documentary filmmaker Kay Harrison, amongst other things described in the previous piece to camera here below. But this journalist asked, you're essentially posited that put the position that the government is now essentially saying it can find ankle bracelets to detect and track the movements of high-risk offenders who are aliens to Australia, but just not high-risk offenders who, for example, threaten to kill children and women in domestic violence cases. And 4 were murdered in South Australia last week, and I've covered all of this off in previous broadcasts. And in my estimation, watch it for yourself. It'll be up on iView soon on the ABC or the National Press Club's website. It's not up there yet. Got to give them a bit of time. It's only 3 o'clock and it only happened at about 12 noon. But in my estimation, the Federal Attorney General, who's a lovely man, Mark Dreyfus, who's just lost his wife, so commiserations. If anyone knows him, sees this, pass it on. It would be hard to have to keep punching at this level of public service when you'd lost the person who was your devoted partner for years. It's really sad. It's a testament to his character. He totally, relative to his own personality, by the way, he totally lost his just after that question, for the very next question that a female journalist asked him, because he resented the implication that he was obfuscating or denying the law, and he got quite het up and quite angry with her. But the question just before her was by a male journalist, again from an outlet that I don't know, and whose name was not printed on the screen. And he said, so let us get this straight. You can find security GPS-monitored tracking ankle bracelets for men, for alien offenders in the community, but you can't find them for Australians. Now, so that's quite a 10-minute preamble to what I said I was going to do, which is read an email that I sent to ministers. The policy advisor for the Minister for Women in Australia, the Minister's Katie Gallagher, one of her policies advisors is Ms. Rochelle White. Then there's the Minister for Zali Steggall, who's a Teal. She's an independent on the Northern Beaches in New South Wales and Sydney, where I grew up. They got rid of the LNP, thank Christ. 7 Teal females, in case you're watching this from overseas. They call themselves Teal. It's just a complete invention of a name. In fact, John Howard literally used the words, and I quote, according to Wikipedia, the Teals are just a bunch of so-called independent groupies, climate change groupies. So they were all female, and they got rid of the Liberal National Party coalition in Australia. That's the coalition of a so-called Liberal government who are not Liberal at all if you were looking at it from a civil libertarian point of view in America. They're not Liberal at all, they're conservative Christians. And then the National Party are largely regional and country voters, and they have made a coalition. So they're called the Liberal National Party, right, LNP. And I keep saying, well, if only Labor, who's traditionally the party of the working man and woman, and the Greens, and we all know who they are, you would think, because they've both got significantly high primary votes, and if they would just form a coalition of the LGP, that's the Labor Green Party in Australia, we would get rid of these conservative Christian idiot, mendacious, lying, thieving, morons who cannot run the economy at all, the Liberal National Party. And of course, I've explained what the evidence for that is in all of my previous broadcasts, and anyone reading the data and the broadsheets each day knows exactly the same thing. They can't. They tripled the budget before COVID. Job seeker payments were made to keep us. They tripled that, and then they'd spent 10 years prior when they were in government just berating the Labor Party about running up debt, when of course it's been announced today by the Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers that Australia doesn't have that debt anymore, and they've done it within the space of 1.5 years. And so it's again a complete mendacious lie, sorry for the tautology, that the Liberal National Party coalition can run the Australian economic situation and the polity better than the Labor Party. That's a total lie by evidence of data. But I do digress. So, to get to the point, I'm just going to do a straight read. It's quite a long one. It'll probably take 20 minutes or 15, but it's a read of the email that I sent. And by the way, when I phoned today, Rochelle White, who's the policy advisor for the Minister for Women, Katie Gallagher, in Canberra, the Federal Minister for Women, and when I phoned them, they've been told, "Oh, are you Danielle? Yes, we've been told not to put you through." I'm sorry, why? "Oh, well, they've responded to you and you're calling too much." I'm like, no. They responded over the totally wrong issue. They lied that I was trying to get interference, that I was trying to win interference in my family law court case. Actually, I've got this entire raft of policy suggestions that I would like to make to them, and they are deliberately ignoring it. And I have what you call the same thing as Rosie Batty and Grace Tame, lived experience, because, as I said, my godfather, who was like an uncle to me, murdered his wife after 40 years of marriage at the age of 68 when she was 63 and she wanted to leave him, which is the most dangerous time for all women when they go to finally leave controlling men. And I've been assaulted by 2 out of the 3 of the fathers of my children. By the way, they all have 4 and 3 children to 3 and 4 other women. So it's not like we're all out of control, people who can't control our breeding here. This is just how life happened. If I was Liz Taylor and filthy rich, I'd have 5 marriages and you'd forgive me, right? So we always hate down on poor women and treat them in a way that we would not treat rich, older men who are allowed to have 4 and 5 wives, and in fact, in many places on earth, entire harems of women, multiple wives. So by the way, I'm just going to flag this. I'll be starting my own religion soon, and it's going to have fully tax-deductible status. And we're going to worship women. And we're going to take it right up to all of the Abrahamic and other male-dominated religions, but that's another issue for another time. So here's the email. I mean, you've got to try and make it a bit. You got to try and put some comedy into it. If you're not laughing, you are dying, aren't you? You're going to laugh or you're going to cry, and I've cried enough, and I'm punching up. So here's the email. And I would have thought that these people might have actually given it some credence, given my experience and given the validity of these ideas. So here they go. So I say, dear all of the people that I just named, read your email, in brackets Rochelle White, who's the policy advisor to Katie Gallagher, Federal Minister for Women, plus urgent issues for the last week of Federal Parliament. And I say thank you for your reply last week, included below, so I include her email so everyone can see it. However, I was not calling you about my case per se. I was wishing to organise an online or in-person meeting with yourself or Minister Gallagher. It is a meeting request and urgent policy suggestions regarding the murder of women by men for the last week of Parliament, especially in light of ankle bracelets fitted to alien men offenders, but somehow not fitted to Australian male offenders. Again, an idea I first moved to third parties in 2017, 1 year after my 68-year-old godfather murdered his wife. These issues I have elaborated in previous correspondence, in brackets with multiple PDF attachments in evidence to you, Ms. White, are fundamentally intersectional, and if we will listen to Grace Tame, Rosie Batty and other women with the lived experience of horrors at the hands of a systemic failure of women and their children being abused and or murdered by men, and hear properly from their lived experience on multiple fronts, then we can listen to mine. for the reasons elaborated below, I say in brackets too. My God, it's loud here, so I'm going to start speaking very loudly because the boys and girls in blue are racing around as usual. I can't stand this hellhole. So then in bold, I say, there are immediately a minimum 5 things which the Australian Federal Parliament could legislate into being with urgency. I'm going to lift my voice up now because I'm a singer, A, I'm a trained actor, B, and more importantly, C, this is urgent, and D, there's an awful lot of sound going on out the window and I'm sick of it. So there's construction and police, so I'm going to raise my voice, okay? Here we go, ladies, we're going to raise our voice. There are immediately a minimum 5 things which the Australian Federal Parliament could legislate into being with urgency. The same urgency that means the entire Labor government, and I like Labor, it's not a reflection on them, but this is the current government, says which you are all bringing to the High Court's release of murderers, rapists and pedophiles into the community due to the recent High Court ruling, but which you have no urgency whatsoever on with regard to the murder, 4 women murdered in South Australia alone last month, of women. New paragraph. And allowing the LNP, the Liberal National Party coalition, if you're from overseas, to use you as a whipping boy for the High Court's decision regarding indefinite detention is idiocy when you could literally kill 2 birds with 1 stone and turn it to your advantage. And that, more importantly, of all Australian women and children suffering the quaint euphemism of domestic violence. Because it's 97% male violence and murder and abuse towards women and children by men, not the other way around. As elaborated to camera at my links below, this is my email that I'm reading yesterday. As elaborated, which they blew me, or they tried to blow me off at the federal government level because I'm trying to organise a meeting before Canberra's finished this week. As elaborated to camera at my links below, Facebook and YouTube, you, Labor, Teals, anybody could, who wants to move a private members bill or unite as a party, in government, could, with immediate legislative effect, in order to drastically reduce the number of women being murdered in a so-called advanced democracy such as Australia, number 1, legislate that in the case of DV accusations where women are being abused and or threatened and or assaulted and or stalked by men, threatening them and or their children, and given this overwhelmingly goes on behind closed doors, where in brackets, where the cowards who abuse women do it cunningly, specifically so that no evidence exists, as with rape and molestation and pedophilia, they don't do it out in open in front of other people who could verify and prove it. Then, close brackets, then you need, close brackets, then you need, in bold, you need to immediately legislate that women can secretly record and have made admissible into evidence recordings and or other secretly obtained proof of these threats to them and their children's lives. Because at the moment it's not admissible evidence. If you don't get the permission of the person you're recording, unless you're the Australian Federal Police, you can't put it before a judge. So how are women meant to prove that these cowardly pieces of shit who are threatening to murder and or already abusing and assaulting them behind closed doors and often isolating them as well, how are they meant to prove unless their secretly recorded recordings are made by legislation in this exceptional circumstance as valid, as admissible evidence? Admissible just simply meaning you can admit it to the judge and it is allowed to be ruled into the body of evidence that the judge, he or she, must take into consideration when then hopefully going and ordering an apprehended domestic violence order or an apprehended violence order full stop or a personal violence order, whatever it is, to protect these women and children. Or anybody necessarily, but it's overwhelmingly, and this is the barrow I'm pushing because this is my experience, 2 men out of 3 of the fathers of my child, plus my godfather at 68 years old, murdering his wife with a pillow after 40 years of marriage. So I get to say this, and don't you forget it. Respect your elders. I'm old. Neil Hawkes, g'day Neil, thanks for tuning in. I hope you can catch up with what I just said. This is an open letter that I wrote yesterday to several members of the Australian Parliament, mostly Katie Gallagher's Minister for Women and her policy advisors and other people, but you can catch up with that later. So that was the first point I made. You must have legislation which immediately allows secret recordings that women make of men threatening to murder and or abuse them and their children, so that it is made admissible. You must make legislation that provides that this is admissible evidence in a court of law, so that a judge can immediately issue an apprehended violence order against these men. So I then go on to say this is vital in bold. As currently, as the Attorney General would know, and most people down there would too, unless you are the AFP, the Australian Federal Police, you are not allowed to make any recordings admissible into evidence in a court of law in Australia unless the person who is being recorded consents. Now, can you imagine Tara Brown or Hannah Clark's partner, both of these murdered women, permitting their female partners to record them threatening them? Can you imagine that? They would either kill them on the spot, bash them on the spot, or at least take the recording device and destroy it. By logic. Blind Freddy could see that. Or as the Family Law Court Registrar, who I got recently, said, it's bleedingly obvious. With a direct, disgusting, ironic pun on bleeding. So this is vital, as currently it's not admissible for you to record somebody secretly and it won't be allowed into law. So the legislation, I finish on the first point, number one. First point, so the legislation needs to come with immediate effect such that women are provided an exception to the rule of evidence about this. I'm scrolling along here. I hope you can see legitimately that I have written this email yesterday. Number two. You then, and I would actually say this, I don't know where Melita or where anyone else who's watching this is from, but you could roll this out in every democracy on earth. You're not going to have a snowball's chance in hell of rolling it out in, a theocracy, male-dominated religious idiocy like Islam or Catholicism or, screwy Judaism, where men control women and their bodies and the law. You're not going to get this up, right? So if advanced democracies like Australia cannot prove themselves to be the bastions of the vanguard of the advent of legislation and actual reform that causes change in this area, then what are we good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. War. What are we good for? Absolutely nothing if we can't do this, right? So I say point two. You then beat the LNP and the no-alition, as other people have coined them, at their own game, because they're trying to beat up Labor this week about the High Court ruling when it's not Labor's fault, and Labor's now scrambling to get across policy where they can recriminalise these people who are rapists and murderers and pedophiles who've been allowed out into the community because they're aliens from overseas. And of course, Americans would understand that term more than Australians because we don't usually call them aliens. We call them queue jumpers or, illegal immigrants. But Americans call them aliens. Wow, I'm an alien. I'm a legal alien. As Sting sung. So these aliens are getting fitted by proposal of the Australian federal government with GPS triangulated, police monitored ankle bracelets. So I say number two. But yet we can't do it for men who are threatening to murder women and their children. And of course, I referred before to Hannah Clark and Tara Brown. And again, as I've said in previous videos, Tara Brown literally went to the Queensland police, who then had the hide to say, we've got no problem with ignoring women and their AVO claims. No, we're fine. Morons. Yes, you do. She went to you many times in the weeks before her murder, where her ex-partner, Lionel Patia, big, outwardly big, inwardly fucking disgustingly small Maori man full of tattoos. And I'm saying that because it's not racist. Aboriginal women in Australia are dying at huge rates Okay, and they're going to go, oh, why are you identifying them by their race? Well, I mean, it happens all over the world, no matter what race, no matter what financial income. And this week we found an 89-year-old woman murdered by her 91-year-old husband. I mean, you've got a case there, arguably, for dementia. But this is dentists. You know, as I told you in previous broadcasts, one of the women who falsely scheduled me at Concord Hospital, and they're being sued, and four subsequent mental health professionals have overturned that ruling. One of the women, the psychiatrist, was a woman called Dr. Reddy, R-E-D-D-Y. She's an Indian woman. I recognised her face on the news, as I've said previously, a couple of years after this happened. So that happened in 2018, so in about 2019, 2020, I saw her face on the news. Her sister was a dentist, an Indian dentist, Australian Indian dentist, and she'd gone out on a Tinder date, decided she didn't like the guy, flicked him, he stalked her, murdered her, chopped up her body into like hundreds of pieces, put it in a barrel, and then drove 4 hours north of Sydney that night, and then accelerated at high speed into the oncoming pathway of a Mack truck and killed himself. So these are educated Indian, tertiary educated, spectacularly professional dentists, psychiatrists, as the great internationally New York Times #1 famous Australian female author Leanne Moriarty points out in her book Big Little Lies. This domestic violence knows no bounds. It happens across all races and cultures, but particularly in places where women have no legal rights. And we're a so-called advanced democracy, so it's not meant to be happening to us. Not at the rates that it is either, and it is disgusting. And of course, Tara Brown went to the police, and he ran, and Lionel Patia ran her off the road after she dropped their 3-year-old daughter to daycare, ran her off the road by giving chase in his car. She literally got run off the road by him slamming into her. Her car rolled onto its roof, and as she was strapped into her seatbelt with a crushed roof on her head, upside down, screaming, "Help me, help me," he came up to the side of the car. He came up to the side of the car, lest we forget. And he picked up a fire hydrant, metal plate, and bashed her 30 times over the head to death. Or Hannah Clark and her 3 children sitting at the traffic lights in Queensland, and their father, her ex-partner, she's gone to live with her parents to try to escape him, like she should have to flee, like there shouldn't be a police force protecting these women with GPS ankle bracelets on these fucking men who are murdering and stalking women. She fled to her parents' house, or tried to, and then took them all out in the car, and he stalked her. So he pulls up beside her at the traffic lights, douses them all with petrol, sets it on fire, and she dies screaming, trying to rescue her children. And she had been to the police. And the bullshit lie! You put this on TV. Don't you dare call me a hysterical crazy bitch. You fucking disgusting people who cannot make any laws to do any... Oh, we can't make any laws. Wring our hands. We can't do anything about... Bullshit, you can't. These women went to the police. There should have been a dedicated police wing that totally monitored and GPS ankle bracelet tracked these men with immediate deploying like it was a fire front. They went and said, please, I'm going to be murdered and so are my children. And they did it. Like my godfather, whose first words in hospital when his brother came to visit him under police guard when he'd murdered his 63-year-old wife at 68 years of age is, "Oh, the food's pretty shit here, isn't it?" They're fucking insane. They think they own women. And they're prepared to kill them so that their ownership of the property of these women can't escape. And you're going to try and tell us, federal government of Australia, Tweedledee or Tweedledum, you've lost me. I'm with the Voluntary Euthanasia Party now, or any other party who'll do something useful. The Reason Party. It used to be the Sex Party, but they've actually, if you look at their policies, they've got the most intelligent, dignified, intellectually dignified intelligent platform policies of any of the parties. Shout out to Fiona Patten, who's a senator in Victoria, who founded that party. You know, they Tweedledee and Tweedledum can go and drop off. The Teals are already taking your vote. And when I phoned you today, you had the temerity to try and put me on a unwanted caller list. Like I don't have serious policy ideas and reforms and abominably suffered and miserably suffered experience for living this. And you think that you can't listen to me. So that's number 2, all right? You fit them with GPS monitored bracelets. Number 3, you legislate with immediate, it's fine, Neil, I don't care who's watching this because people watch it later. Good, have a nice day. I'm sorry for my anger, but I'm actually really not sorry for my anger because as I saw on the 2021 Women's March in Sydney, where there were just tens of thousands of very, very cool men and women marching for women's rights, a placard saying, men are lucky, all women want is equality, not revenge. What is being done to women all over the world? The rape and murder of them in war, the 70% of the Gaza Strip murdered of women and children, the rape by Hamas of Israeli women, the torching and rape of their bodies, the rape by the female Tamil Tiger soldiers, and they had their breasts cut off on video camera, and then the men were heard laughing in the background who did this to them, chopped off their breasts, fucked their dead corpses, sorry for the tautology, fucked their corpses, cut off their breasts, and then sent it around films, laughing in the background to their friends. Men as a subclass of the species are Neanderthals, okay? Let's just get something straight, all right? Yes, lots of them aren't, but huge swathes of them are, okay? And that is by evidence, because 97% of all rapes, murders, and wars on earth are committed by men, okay? So they are the problem, and they are the problem because they are overwhelmingly in power and they are overwhelmingly commandeering religion on every front. Buddhists, oh my God, 2,000 years, and there's not one female Dalai Lama. Oh, wonder why. Nick Friedman. Timmy Jimmy's brother, you know, such a devout Buddhist, like why are there no female Dalais again on a numbers game alone? Let's see, we're 51% of the population, there's been 2,000 years of Dalai Lamas, you live about 70 or 80 years each, do the maths on that, but no women. Wow, amazing. Yeah, bullshit. It's a patriarchy, and this is the result of the patriarchy, okay? So, forgive my Hannah Gadsby style Nanette dive off into the anger that this causes. What do women do with their anger, as Helen Garner has said, the great Australian essayist and novelist? What do women do with their anger? You're looking at it, and it's fucking justified. Right, so number 3, back to the reading of yesterday's email to multiple female party members. I hope you see this over Christmas. And if you are watching this, and if you are bludging and not pulling your little finger out and writing 3 sentences, this is insane, we can go to jail or get a fine or a criminal record for not paying a parking fine and driving our cars 4 months later when we don't pay it, but nothing happens to people who steal children off other adults, men or women. And we can't put ankle bracelets on men who are threatening to kill women, but we can fine them for people who the High Court released because they're from overseas. And of course, you know what the answer is there, isn't it? We all like to hate the aliens. We all like to hate the aliens. They've got to be from overseas, so they're dirty little interlopers. Let's not forget the white Australia policy. They're dirty little, some of the most vulnerable people on earth, and in this case, rapists, murderers, and pedophiles as well. So they come in, they get a GPS monitored bracelet, don't they? But you can't do it for women. What are you? Retarded? And I mean that in the sense of fire retardant, you know, the stuff that makes you unable to be caught on fire. Are you retarded? Are you intellectually retarded that you can't work out that this is what needs to happen for women and children who are being threatened by men? So, back to the email. Point number 3. Legislation with immediate effect that an entire new, or, as I say here, divided from the current, so either an entire new or divided from the current wing of the police in every state and territory needs to be set up to tackle specifically domestic violence. Hand wringing. We couldn't do that. Oh, hang on. We already have Highway Patrol Division, and all they do is run up the road and chase people. Get them if they're drunk, get them if they're speeding, just ping them for revenue raising and don't chase them at all and give them a ticket in the mail for speeding. We've already got an entire dedicated division of police in every 7 state and territories in Australia who just do highway patrol because it's fun. Ah! Woo, 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 woo! It's fun, isn't it? But you don't have any dedicated wing to domestic violence, do you? Couldn't give a shit? Is that what it is? Because there's no other reason at this point that you don't have it other than you don't give a shit. Or as the old hideous, crass Australian saying goes, as I've said before, you couldn't organise a root in a brothel with a fistful of hundreds. And of course, we don't really find that many brothels where women want to go and root men, but it's always the other way around. So don't blame me for making that statement up. That was a man's statement. But they are so inept that they will give you a bullshit argument that they cannot take the current New South Wales and Queensland and Northern Territory and Tasmanian and West Australian and South Australian and ACT police force and either divide a portion of them off to do nothing but monitor men who've got ankle bracelets on who threaten to murder their women. You see what I did there? To threaten, as if they own them. Oh my God. To threaten and murder women and men usually, I'll say men, in the case that it may be, partners of men or, people being threatened constantly and being stalked. But it's overwhelmingly women and children by men who have threatened to murder and or have assaulted and abused women and children. Why is there not an absolutely dedicated wing, either fit a whole new one up with new training or take the extant police force and carve off a whole part of it in each state and territory and devote it to the monitoring of nothing other than domestic violence and have that? Okay, so that's what I say at point 3. Point 4, I say, despite the fact that fires kill on average, actual fires in the bush in Australia, like Canada, and even the fires are burning on old peat moist forests down in Tasmania, where they're never meant to burn and never have before in 10,000 years of history. Such is climate change. So despite the fact that fires kill on average over the last 30 years in Australia only 1 person a year, yet men kill on average almost 2 women a week, you are, as MPs, literally signalling to educated Australian voters, and especially women like me, that we remain not, in capitals, as valuable as property that can be burned in a fire. Thus, in exactly the same way that the Rural Fire Service, and here's one of my other cardinal ideas, in exactly the same way that the Rural Fire Service has been funded and rolled out into a nationally coordinated defence force against death by fire or, fire hurting property, with millions of dollars of GPS tracked and spec designed trucks and firefighting vehicles, multi-million dollar real-time coordinated headquarter units, actual places where there's big high-res screens that are all linked up by satellites to the GPS that know where all the trucks is, and they've got cameras out in multiple locations across Australia where they can see the fire fronts. And of course, we don't need to roll this out because we've already got cameras on every street corner in Australia, so we can see where there's a DV perpetrator who's trying to pursue a woman or her children and hurt her. We can actually track them through the traffic because it's already happening in multi-million dollar, fully personalised, fully equipped system headquarters with incredible amounts of money spent on all these trained people who are dedicated to this, and they can watch where the trucks are, watch where the fires are. They know the size of the fire and all the different trucks' capabilities, with all the different hose fittings and all the different levels of qualification of the personnel in them to fight those fires. They're constantly coordinating between the levels of the chain of command of the people in the units to fight those fires. Why can't you do that for women who are being murdered twice a week in Australia if you can do it for fires that kill one person a year in Australia? Why? What bullshit excuse are you going to use now? Why? Rural Fire Service, you can go down and volunteer for the Rural Fire Service, but you're not going to get to do what what Scott Morrison failed to, which is hold a hose when he'd rather go to Hawaii for a holiday while the entire nation was burning in Australia. You're not going to get to hold a hose unless they first put you through an extremely rigorous training program where you are trained, where you are tested for what capacity you have to lift what size hoses and which hoses are fitted to what, and all the myriad protocols that are rolled out around fighting fire fronts and where you're allowed to go, and the constant massive infrastructure, the massive hundreds of millions of dollar infrastructure spend that surrounds fighting fires. But you can't fight domestic violence in a similar model. And volunteers don't get to go on those fire trucks and hold a hose, to get back to the point, and fight the scourge of fire like they could be trained to fight the scourge of men murdering women, because they don't have to get out of their cars and confront them and taser them and go, "You're under a citizen's arrest," or "I'm going to taser you," although they could if they were trained to, in the same way that they could hold a hose to fight a fire. Why can't we train a specific wing up to hold a taser and disable these men when they're stalking women to kill them? Why? I mean, there's another idea, just off the cuff. That's an extempore idea. But they could actually follow the men who are following the women, and could report into the dedicated domestic violence police force. Oh, here they are. They're at that set of lights. Yep, look, he's getting out of his car. We're going to need immediate three car backup. Come armed. You know, he looks like he's got a knife. You could actually roll out a domestic violence volunteer brigade nationally, fitted up with state-based headquarters, GPS monitoring of ankle bracelet perpetrators. You could do it. You just don't give a shit about Australian women's lives. You don't, or you do something about it. Don't lie, okay? Let's just literally, you know where the value is. Actions speak louder than words. You know where the value is in any society by where we spend our money. And it's our money. When women do the lion's share of unpaid work, bringing up future Australian taxpayers unpaid as mothers, when they take time out from the paid workforce to do the unpaid labour of men, whilst their HECS debts, their higher education contribution schemes, university debts that they owe to the government, go up and up and up in interest rates that are indexed to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Female debts go up and up and up and up and up, while women take unpaid time out to rear future Australian taxpayers, and all the time that they're buying goods and services, GST, they're paying at least 10% tax, even if they're on a pension, right? Every time they go and buy something, because John Howard made sure of that. There's at least a 10% GST on everything, a goods and services tax, let alone a 30% roughly for an average wage earner income tax, let alone all the tolls and then the fees and then the levies. Non-hypothecated, which means they are not allotted to serve the very thing that they were generated from. So if you get a road toll payment and tax, a road toll tax, and you pay it, it's not allotted to go back into roads. You know, it's not hypothecated, it's just sent into general consolidated revenue. Don't forget, sorry, if you know all this shit, fine. But really, my objective here is to educate the average Joe and Julie voter. Because this shit is what's happening on your watch with your tax-paid money. When Google and Rio Tinto and the Catholic Church don't pay tax much at all. But you do. Unreal. You say you can't do anything about it. So, point 4 roll out that you should model, or that we could, if only we had the willpower and valuing of women, which we do not. We could roll out a rural fire service style national response unit, replete with the hundreds of millions of dollars that are invested in real-time GPS triangulated tracking devices on the ankles of men who do this to women and children. And so that's quite an extensive point, which I've just done off the cuff. It goes from there, point 4, and it goes all the way down to point 5. Where I say to anyone who's still looking, most importantly, I'm sorry, I've got high blood pressure and this really gets me going, even though I've got the aircon on at full Icelandic blast. Point 5, to everyone in the Australian government, state and federal, particularly the ministers of women, Jodie Harrison for New South Wales, Katie Gallagher federally, and I haven't committed to memory the other states. And Yasmin Catley, the police minister, New South Wales. You had a hornet's nest of misogyny down there, just in New South Wales, just like you do with Queensland. Just like we do suffer with Queensland. Most importantly, point 5, why on earth do you, as elected female members of the Australian Parliament, or any male who honestly professes to care about the atrocious rates of murder of women and their children by men in this nation, especially Aboriginal women, why do you not, and then it goes bold, immediately remove by police force the man from the home instead of forcing the women and children to flee and run to domestic violence shelters that are temporary at best? That's what it says. Temporary at best. Monitor them. Immediately remove by police force the man from the home instead, and fit him with a GPS ankle bracelet. Monitor his every movement, and the mothers and her children can wear a monitoring device as well, although not on their ankles, so that they don't have to be humiliated like the men who've assaulted them should be. And so that they can keep these devices worn on them like in a necklace, in the same way that people who are in high needs care in nursing homes can elect to have, and only if they've got money, I believe it is, can elect to have a, pardon me, this is such a crappy rig. Please, if you've got money out there and you want to help me get this fattening professionally so I can do this all the time, help, send me money. I've got a GoFundMe page here. Do something useful. I'm sure you're doing other things that are useful, but regarding this issue, do something useful. Can't believe this. It's not working. It's going to keep going on. I'm going to hold it. Stuff it. Get men out of the house, not women, when they're being... Hi, Anne Steve Murray. There's a lot to cover off, so I'm going to keep going because I'm not going to try and cover off what I already have. You've come in at the very last minute. With apologies. You can watch it because I keep it here and I post it over to DDTV, that's DEETV Australia at YouTube. The link's on my Facebook page. Push it around. I need money to keep doing this. I'm meant to go to Canberra. I've been trying all week. I've got no free place to stay. I don't have any money to stay there. Tomorrow's the last day and I want to door knock these people to make sure that they get it. So point 6 that I wrote to them yesterday in the Parliament. When the staying of these humans, in brackets women and children, in a house, instead of removing the man from it, would present a danger, say for example if the man were to be too easily located to the mother and her children by way of where he needed to stay with his family or wherever he lived, and present a danger that could not be negotiated by the immediate arrival of police with proximity. Then provide immediate high security housing for all of these women and their children. So that's point 6 after point 5. So they're my 5 points of how the Australian federal government, given that they're all happy to find ankle bracelets for men from overseas who rape and murder and pedophile children and have been re-released by the High Court, not Labor, into the community this week. And so Labor has to scramble on the last week of Parliament before Christmas 2023, scramble across a procurement process to procure GPS-tracked ankle bracelets to track these people. Why you're not doing it, as I've said since 2017, and I said yesterday, and then I saw a man whose name I didn't catch, who was a journalist in the National Press Club today, who spoke to Claire O'Neill, the Home Affairs Minister, and Federal Attorney General Mark Dreyfus. He asked the question, are you not creating an entire class of people where you're prepared to GPS monitor them with ankle bracelets if they're rapists and murderers from overseas, but you won't do it for protecting women when they're rapists and murderers who abuse women and kill them and their children just because they're Australian? And I've been saying this for 7 years. But I'm not in the National Press Club gallery. Yet. Got a journalism degree from UTS if you want to go and check me out at LinkedIn. So I'll be setting up a Patreon page soon because I'm going to be an independent journalist, as I already am by virtue of the fact that I'm doing this, because I'm sick of their bullshit lies of inaction. And I want to hold these people accountable, male or female, any party. I'm no longer party partisan because none of them doing anything about it. So I finished this rather lengthy email. After those 5 key points, I told you it would be a long one. I finished this rather lengthy email by saying, you simply cannot keep saying that you simply cannot keep saying that male-dominated budgets purchased, made on the backs of unpaid female labour and the continual deprivation of universally free childcare, which is deeply necessary to all women, full stop, for their parity with men, and especially necessary for those fleeing male violence. You cannot say that you can find $600 billion to spend on already redundant nuclear submarines which will not turn up in time for China to take Taiwan, then turn up in the port of Darwin, which morons in the Liberal National Party coalition under Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and the Country Party-led Northern Territory Minister leased to the Chinese government for 99 years. When you already have Chinese-manufactured underwater drones which detect submarines and can already be deployed to do so by China at the cost of only $2,500 per unit. And our submarine spend, is $600 billion. And they're already redundant because the Chinese have got drones that for $2,500 each, they could just manufacture 1 million of them. And what would that be? $250 million? $250 million, and so they can just roam the oceans underwater, send it up to their satellites. By the way, I didn't write this in the email, but yesterday I heard on the news, I'm a news junkie, so forgive me. Yesterday I heard on the news from a specialist that Chinese satellites, whilst not, and there's, something like 30,000 satellites orbiting the Earth from all different countries and all different corporations, and they're up there. And so in the event that there would be war down on Earth, there are these Chinese satellites that are making very close flybys to other satellites' orbits, and they are potentially armed, so could literally shoot down the other satellites, which would knock out completely our communication systems in a time of war. Then turn up in the port of Darwin for a cup of tea. right next to Pine Gap and Australia, Britain and America, the Allies' military training zones. And the LNP did that, by the way, under Malcolm Turnbull and the National Party in the Northern Territory, just like they blew up the Yukon Gorges, 45,000-year-old, one of the oldest human places on Earth. They did that for $500 million. So the price that we got, don't know how much of it was hypothecated and got given to Northern Territory, versus under federalism and our tax system just got allocated all over the nation by federalism and tax under a federalist system. $500 million. So we got paid $500,000 to sell ourselves out for 99 years to China. So I go on. So you cannot say that you can find $600 billion on already redundant nuclear submarines which will not turn up in time for China to take Taiwan, then turn up in the port of Darwin, which morons in the LNP under Malcolm Turnbull, as everything I just said, have leased to the Chinese for 99 years. And then when they're already redundant because the Chinese can manufacture at the cost of only $2,500 per unit underwater submarine detecting drones. So it's game over. Before it's even begun for the boys and their war toys, I write. Cynically purchased by female, 51% of Australian female, tax money when already redundant and when the supply chain of submarine manufacture is overwhelmingly male-dominated anyway, isn't it? Don't see too many chicks working in submarine manufacture. You don't. And, of course, there would be statistics that you could go and get to prove that. Take my word for it. If I'm wrong, I'll owe you on a bet, okay? And when we're being told simultaneously that 51% of our population, that's women, can never be equal to men because most, if not all, of their full-time mothers' wages and or salaries will be spent on childcare if they're working a 40 or 50-hour-a-week job, and when universally free childcare is exactly what is required for women to achieve genuine equality and parity with men, particularly single mothers who need to escape male violence, and when Dr. Anne Summers, one of the most famous feminists on earth, and she's Australian, like Dr. Eva Cox, great Australian feminist academics who've been working 50 plus years on domestic violence against women and childcare in Eva Cox's case, domestic violence with Dr. Anne Summers, and she tracked the ABS data and interrogated the Australian Bureau of Statistics data last year in about September, August, and found out that women who leave men who abuse them fare atrociously financially and otherwise in the long run, let alone the immediate short term. And when free universal childcare is what particularly single mothers need to escape male violence, and when Dr. Anne Summers has proved all of this from her 2022 interrogation of the ABS data, that women fare atrociously, like I just said, and when even Bronwyn Bishop managed to tell Jenny Brockie on SBS's Insight program many moons ago now, this is at least 10 years ago, that there is $1, so Bronwyn Bishop was an LNP female, with a name like Bronwyn, you'd hope so, or you'd expect so. Don't get offended if you're trans. She was a very conservative. My dad used to think he was so great because he was a friend of hers. Suffice to say, my dad and I don't talk. For many reasons, but that's merely one of them. But even Bronwyn Bishop managed to tell Jenny Brockie on SBS's Insight program many moons ago now that $1.87 is returned to the Australian tax base for every $1 spent on childcare. So men and women who run governments, successive governments, Labor in this case, but Liberal National Party for the last 10 years, can't even get it together, even though we know that if it's not as if the emancipation and equality of women and their freedom to participate in the meaningful workplace paid is not a good enough reason for universally free childcare, and as if women who are leaving violent men don't need universally free childcare immediately in order to ensure that they can put a roof and food over their children and their heads and pay petrol and medical and clothes and phone and gas and electricity. Which part of this do any of you dolts not get? So if it's not good enough for their humanity, you can even prove it, if you don't give a shit about their humanity, which successive governments at federal level do not, clearly, you can even prove it on an economic level, right? So what's your excuse now? You don't have one. You don't have a leg to stand on. And so I then go on to say, in other words, successive governments have proved that property and war is most important for male-dominated governments to spend female-free labour-generated budgets on, because we do the lion's share of unpaid labour, rearing future Australian taxpayers as children and then nursing them down when they're sick as our parents. We do. Women do the lion's share of that, and we don't get paid for it at all. So their male GDP, their gross domestic product, is based on unpaid female labour. And this is not news to any academic feminist. This is old news. In fact, there's a great article in a magazine, a fine magazine called The Monthly in Australia, and a woman whose name I'm going to call up, her first name's Anne, and I'll find it on Google right here, right now. And she wrote an article in that magazine called The Great Domestic Hoax. And of course, you don't need her, because before her, there was the emeritus Dr. Marilyn Joy Waring, the first and youngest female politician in New Zealand, who changed literally the United Nations measurement of GDP, because she found out, to her disgust and astonishment, when she finally went to New York City and found a copy of it, because it wasn't anywhere else, and two pale, stale British males had written it, she found that women's contribution to the national economies all over the world, but particularly in third world countries, added up to absolutely nothing. And then a genius, and that's what the name, therefore, of the documentary, if you want to look it up for free on YouTube, YouTube are parasites, they should be paying, but they're not. If you want to look it up on YouTube, the female Canadian director, her name is Terry Nash, Terre, I believe it is, Nash, and she made a documentary on Dr. Marilyn Joy Waring's life. She's in her 70s now, and she changed the UN code. She wanted to be an opera singer. She's a genius. But she was elected into a country party, a national party seat, at only 20 years of age, and she was the first and only female elected New Zealand representative in the federal parliament, where she had to do things like listen to men joke in the parliamentary sitting rooms after parliament about how absurd it was that there would be feminists and women women who respect equal human rights for females, so I call them feminists, who were calling for rape to be, in the case of New Zealand in the 70s, rape to be criminalised, and these overwhelmingly male members of parliament were laughing and joking that as if they wouldn't have the right to come home and fuck their wives, whether their wives liked it or not. And so this is the sort of horseshit that she had to listen to before she trekked off around the world. And I've explained this in other previous videos down below and over at YouTube. And she sat down because these women were so poor and so working like their asses off all over the world with children in third world countries, and they didn't have a watch. So she sat down in the sand with them and she drew literally an arc of the parabola, a parabolic curve of where the sun moved every day in the sky. And she said, what are you doing here before the sun comes up? And what are you doing here when the sun is on this line? And what are you doing when it's there? And what are you doing when it's there? And what are you doing when it's above you? And she made incredible graphs, beautiful coloured charts, which you can see in this documentary called Counting for Nothing by Canadian director Terry Nash, about the life of Dr. Marilyn Joy Waring, W-A-R-I-N-G. I seriously suggest you go and look at it. It's an hour and a half long and it will change your life. And if it doesn't, I don't think you have a pulse or a heart or a spine or a brain cell. Just my take. And then, of course, when she found this revolting fact out that women's labour gives men the ability to make all their profits in all of their industries, and yet we don't even have universally free childcare, and still don't. She went and rewrote the rules for the United Nations, for the incorporation by the United Nations of women and their unpaid labour and their subsistence existences, you know, like third world countries where they'd have a chicken and a goat and children, and they'd just get some eggs and sell some goats and kill a chicken, and they'd try and bring their children up. And then Dr. Marilyn Joy Waring also sat down with these third world and every world men, and they asked them what they were doing, literally doing, at each given point in the day, and found, surprise, surprise, radical differences, and women working 15 and 16 hours a day themselves to the bone, looking after children and elderly people for nothing, so that men could produce budgets that completely excluded any provision for women and children, of childcare, or in my case of what I'm talking about here today as well, protection from being murdered and assaulted by men. Don't you think it's time that we got paid back, ladies? Don't forget, I'm going to be starting my own religion soon. It's going to have tax-free status. We're going to worship the clitoris. The only thing on any Homo sapiens body that does nothing other than give sexual pleasure. Don't you think I'm joking? That's a side project. So, I think I'll wrap that one up, because I then go on to talk about the idiocy of still having things like commercial in confidence clauses. I then rattle off a raft of other reasons that I wished to meet with Alison Burns, my local Member of Parliament down here in Wollongong in the Illawarra. She refused. After 3 months, I went in there 4 times in 3 months, as explained below in previous emails, and she pretended I was harassing her and then pretended that I was trying to get her to interfere in my family law court case. No, I wasn't. I was trying to talk to her about the structural or systemic issues that pertain to women in this nation and what's holding them back, and vis-a-vis murder of them, and vis-a-vis universally free childcare, and vis-a-vis a whole raft of legislation that could be enacted to change that. She blew me off. And then phoning Rochelle White's office, because I've phoned a few times, because she gave me a blow-off email going, don't call anymore, we can't interfere. And I said, I'm trying to interfere, I wasn't trying. You're not listening. I'm trying to talk about reform of the legislation so that the 10 adults I know, 7 men and 3 women, never have to go through not seeing their children again when they're loving parents and end up suicidal, like I have. And I won't tell their names because it's their privacy, but literally 9 other adults I know in a cohort of 650 acquaintances and friends on Facebook, which is 1.5%, which is a large figure, of all adults I know who haven't seen their children for years, and they're loving, kind, lovely parents, and they haven't. And they want to die. And it's crushed their soul and their spirits because they've had their children stolen. Which is what Hamas did to Israelis, and look what Israel's now doing under male right-wing governments to slaughter 70% of the 15,000